I understand how difficult the tension between feeling your soul calling you in one direction, but the system and what you've learned pulling you in another. This is the paradox that many of us feel. Energy work at its core is about embodiment, not handbooks, integrity, not imitation, truth, not tradition. Because you've already seen how mainstream Reiki operates, where hierarchy breeds limitation, power dynamics masquerade as wisdom, and individuality is quietly erased in the name of doing it right. Here we strip away illusion and return to the pulse of truth that doesn't outsource spiritual authority. It's not about replacing one dogma with another, it's about returning to the source of power. And that has always been within you, not in symbols, attunements, or lineages that ask you to surrender your sovereignty. This is not where you come to be taught how to do Reiki someone else's way. This is where you come to reclaim your own. You perhaps have heard me share on my need for liberation and expansiveness and depth because as an intuitive, I've found that I'm not craving more information, that I'm starving for connection, for freedom, for integrity. So trying to force myself into a dogmatic or restrictive box where methods and practices are prescribed, it just doesn't work for me. It simply can't work for me. I need to do life and work my way, honouring my truth, my authenticity, respecting the gifts that are already within me innately. We're not looking for answers handed down to us. We're able to unearth our own inside an environment that values sovereignty and not systems. So that can often evoke the question, do I need Reiki training then, Jane? Given it's within me, you keep saying that. And it is a brilliant, really smart question. So let me share on it. Working with energy means working with the unseen. Any Reiki training, no matter how good or otherwise we might deem that to be, opens us up to becoming more and more tuned in to unseen energies. And this, in my experience, comes in two forms. One of them, I took a deep dive into in season 4, episode 2. If you want to go back and listen, I'll briefly recap that over the next minute and then we'll move on to the second one. So, firstly, these energies might be the emotional and energetic charge of others. As humans, scientifically, we can all pick up and take on other people's emotional and energetic stuff that isn't ours, okay? Those of us who are intuitive empaths have the proclivity to do that on a much, much deeper level. And I find that the majority of intuitives are finely tuned like this from a really young age. So we often develop physical reactions instead of responses to cope with, for example, sensing others' pain or feeling overwhelmed in crowds. Most often leaving us anything from drained to totally burnt out for days afterwards, which means here, our gift of being able to sense and pick up on energy, that's a gift, is keeping us trapped. There is huge opportunity to flip that, to be empowered within that gift. What most often happens here in my experience is that intuitives are naturally pulled to energy work for a whole bunch of reasons. Then go into mainstream Reiki attunements, which heighten and intensify our natural intuitive empathic abilities. But at this point, the majority of us are still trapped within that gift of being an intuitive empath. So it's not heightening and intensifying empowered, an empowered gift. It's heightening and intensifying a trapped gift, which means that that gift becomes more and more of a burden, essentially. And this, most often in my experience, leads to energetic bleed in Reiki sessions with clients where the practitioner is in some way picking up and taking on the energy of their client, feeling anything from sick, hot, cold, drained, off, however the client's feeling physically or emotionally after the session's ended. And this aside, attunements are all about reconnecting to our spiritual body. That is spiritual self and spiritual team. As you might have heard me say before, we don't need permission or access to do this via an attunement, via a teacher or a lineage. We can do that safely and effectively for ourselves. So, Firstly, there's emotional unseen energy, and secondly, there's spiritual unseen energy. Spiritual wisdom or spirit-led wisdom or spirit, I use those interchangeably, is spiritual unseen energy. It isn't the same as being psychic or psychic connection ordinarily in the way that we have come to view that within our society. Spiritual energy is the unseen intelligence that exists beyond the edges of what might appear seen or possible. It's not about reading minds, predicting the future. It's about embodying a knowing that transcends mental body intellect and aligns us with a higher truth, guiding us to live and to work in harmony with our authentic essence, our true core. It's the wisdom that emerges when we allow spiritual support to guide us in life and in our Reiki practice. I keep speaking about these things like they are separate. It's all one, right? And it's all a remembering. I think when we look at Reiki practice as being something separate from ourselves, that within itself is a bit of an issue, right? There's meaning to the flashes that you see out the corner of your eye, the colours, the animals, the beings, the sounds, the senses, the feelings, all spiritual wisdom that when grounded into reality is really useful in life, practice and work. And again, we don't need to be given access to spiritual wisdom by someone else via an attunement. It's right there, readily available for us to tap into. You might have heard people say it's normal to feel ill after an attunement. It's common, but it's not normal. It's a sign for me that something's missing, the foundational support to hold that level of spiritual energy. Now, once I got over the fear of being able to sense, then see, then hear, that's how it began for me, spiritual energy. I had no idea what to do with it, how to make it make sense, how to harness that tangibly, meaningfully, to actually help my reality in a way that was safe, in a way that was effective. So that's the second type of unseen energy, spiritual energy. And in my decade of experience, the core theory of the basic mechanics of unseen energy is most of the time missing from mainstream Reiki training, which means you might find yourself in a position similar to where I was at, able to practice, qualified to practice, but where congruence lacks. Things are not feeling right. Bits, or the majority, or perhaps all of practice is feeling off. You've got questions. Now, I find it vital to root spiritual authority. So by anchoring to intuition and spiritual wisdom, both are the areas that I've just spoken about there, we can build an unshakable self-trust that no teacher or trend or tradition can shake. Now, I just want to be a wee bit more clear, perhaps, on how intuition feeds into what I was speaking about above. So, the more that we peel back the layers, the more that we explore and become true, living in a way, practicing in a way, working in a way that is true to us and who we are, the more we are building a sense of inner safety that's essential for intuitive clarity. The more we're rewriting patterns of disassociation for stronger intuitive messages. So we see there how that flows and what that means for intuition. So rooting spiritual authority is where clarity begins and the noise fades. It's here where our unique blueprint of energy practice is established in truth, in authenticity and integrity, and it evolves. You might have heard me chatting about the natural evolution of life and Reiki practice in the last episode, the becoming being the destination, because there is no final end point. And I'll roll back round to why anchoring to intuition and spiritual wisdom by rooting spiritual authority is really key in my experience after I share on this. Now, what I'm sharing on here took me, I don't know, maybe 3 years, possibly more, to define for myself. And it was really only as a result of working with my spiritual team that I could do that. So let me explain what I mean. In mainstream Reiki training, we are taught, we're given steps on how to work with Reiki energy, ways to access that, methods to use, symbols, hand positions, so on. So firstly there, if we go back to what I was sharing on about being an intuitive, I was always going to be stuck. I was always going to hit a cap on the connection that I could access because it's restrictive. Every energy has a spirit. Not every energy has a soul. Living things have a soul, but every energy has a spirit. And all of us can work with the spirit of an energy in our own unique way to access the pure, clear essence of the energy, unencumbered and non-dogmatically. Where that relationship is exclusive to each of us because we're an exclusive human being. So that would make sense for me, right? And Reiki, being a spiritual modality in my experience, requires a spiritual connection to self and a team, like I mentioned before, but to Reiki energy as well. Our connection is likely to always feel like it's hitting a wall or it's capped or it's just not quite getting there. More's available, deeper's available, and it's because there is. And I recall the day that I realised that for myself, that I could work with Reiki energy as a living, pulsating entity that had a texture, a colour, and that I could weave this spiritual connection into my life with Reiki energy, where I wasn't always having to take time out to self-Reiki. Absolute light bulb moment for me. How Reiki energy manifests for me is different to how it does for those that I work with. And that's the beauty, right? All individual connection. And that connection comes about, is led by my intuition and the integration of spiritual wisdom. It's this part that allows theory to be unique when we take a framework of principles that are energetically sound and safe and apply, integrate, embody in our own exclusive way, allowing connection to Reiki energy itself to be unrestrictive and non-dogmatic. Now, to further that, I find the mainstream Reiki training ordinarily provides theory on Reiki energy, universal life force energy. Now, Usui's way of working with Reiki energy is his style. That's why it's called Usui Reiki. It's the same for any lineage, holy fire, secum, so on. There's theory on Reiki energy taught, even if that is someone else's style and not encouraging of spiritual authority by allowing us to unearth our own style. But there is no theory the biggest majority of the time on personal life force energy. And I like to describe that like this. Universal life force energy, that's Reiki energy, is the universal consciousness that doesn't originate from someone's own energy system. Personal life force energy is someone's own individual personal power, personal energy. If you've ever found yourself removing or extracting energy from a client in a Reiki session or when self-Reikiing, then maybe not knowing where to put that energy. Do I earth it? Do I send it up into the sky in a bubble? I was always trying to earth it personally. Or sense there's a deeper connection available than light and relaxing Reiki, where you as a practitioner can help support the root cause of an issue, then this might help you to answer some of your own questions. We can't replace an egg yolk with an egg white, meaning we can't use universal life force energy, Reiki, to fill up a gap where personal life force energy has been extracted. So being energetically tuned in, you innately might be starting to work with someone's personal life force energy because you're working with another human being with your energy work. I found myself at that point a couple of years after mainstream Reiki training without realising it really to begin with. And if you don't find yourself in that place, it's okay. It's not failing or you're not doing anything wrong. And personal energy isn't something, therefore, that you can't or shouldn't work with. In fact, I really encourage everybody to embrace working with personal energy as well as Reiki energy for a deeper, more potent layer of healing. So a loss of personal life force can look like anything from childhood bullying to an argument with a partner to a car crash to abuse. You might like to think of personal life force energy as the fire that sits underneath the lower Celtic cauldron, power centre, or the root chakra, depending on the healing system that you personally subscribe to. When the fire is roaring and burning as it should be, a person's vibrant, passionate, peaceful. They're owning their space in the world with a really strong sense of self. Each time a person loses personal life force energy, a blanket puts the fire out, either a little or a lot. And the blankets can layer on top of each other, dimming and dulling, or even putting the fire out completely. Spiritual detoxification technique removes the blankets from the fire, takes away what doesn't belong. Personal life force energy return technique kindles and restores that fire to full vitality. The fire's then burning brightly again, yeah? The universe likes everything being in its rightful place. Therefore, these two techniques go hand in hand. And then working with portals allows a practitioner to remove and return energy safely, spiritually guided. This means there's no question as to where that energy that you feel like you're removing, we're going to question where that's going. And here as well, energetic bleed, mentioned it before, where the practitioner's giving away their energy to or taking on the energy of a client as their own. That's eradicated, because here we're working with both personal and universal life force energy with safe and effective spiritually guided healing. This is why, in my experience, it's important to build spiritual authority. Once we've rooted in intuition and spiritual wisdom, which I always like to point out, has nothing to do with how long someone has been practicing Reiki or been on a spiritual path, and it's got everything to do with how deeply we are committed to listening beyond logic. Once we've rooted, we build, and building is the phase where knowledge becomes grounded in trust, led by your individuality, not through regurgitating methods or practices, but by integrating this advanced theory, creating room for your evolution and expansion, irrespective of previous Reiki training or not. So I'm going to pull all of this in answer to that brilliant question. Do I need Reiki training then, Jane? Given it's within me, based on my wisdom and my experience. Energetic entanglement, that if you're like me, we would rather avoid, is 99% sure without training. And if you're here and you're still with me, you're likely to know that. I'm not stating anything that you don't already know here, because it is highly likely that you are on a path where you're perhaps working back the way to try and iron out the gaps and holes that you've found that you can sense from mainstream Reiki training. And that entanglement could come from being tapped into unseen energies, whether being energetically porous in life and as a practitioner, picking up and taking on others' emotional, energetic stuff in daily life, or energetic bleed in a Reiki session, with that physical reactivity as opposed to responsiveness attached, or whether spiritual energies, the flashes out the corner of the eye, the animals, colours, objects that you might see, sense, hear, feel, and you're not quite sure how to decode those safely and meaningfully. Or perhaps you do know how to decode them safely and meaningfully, but they're just coming at such a rate that you can't, there's no energetic boundaries, there's no spiritual energetic boundaries, so flying in left, right and centre. Or that energetic entanglement could be from theory based only on universal life force energy, as opposed to this and personal life force energy. It's back to not being able to replace an egg yolk with an egg white, right? For me personally, it was all of this. I didn't root or build spiritual authority. So embodying the next vital element, that was impossible. Being the authentic leader that I craved being, I couldn't do, when all of this was really fragmented and disjointed. I had trained in a lot of different modalities, and I really didn't know how to, and I didn't know how to pull them all in together into one thing that lit my heart, set my heart on fire, that was impactful, and that also just pulled in all of my wisdom, all of my life's experience, all of My training, I couldn't do it. And it was purely as a result of not being able to root and build spiritual authority. It wasn't that I wasn't able to do it. Actually, that's inaccurate. I was able to root and build spiritual authority, but I was just trying in all the wrong places. The books, the methods, the more trainings, the more courses. I needed the environment that would just help me unearth the answers for myself. Now, here's something that will not be too popular. Can you work with Reiki energy, universal life force energy, without training? In my experience, absolutely. Absolutely you can. As long as you've rooted spiritual authority, that is, anchored to intuition and spiritual wisdom, and therefore you're an empowered intuitive empath with a solid connection, confident connection to your spiritual team. Would I advise it? No, because of the energetic entanglements that I just spoke about. Because I'm working with universal life force energy and in having clients, you're then naturally going to start tuning into a client's personal life force energy. And you don't have skills in that. You don't have support in that 99% of the time. Especially if it's mainstream Reiki that you've gone down the route of first. So you're unraveling and working with energy, evolving within that as you go, as we all do. And I believe we absolutely all should do. But without that core theory from building and being able to trust intuition and spiritual insight safely from rooting, so eventually it'll make sense, we're going to hit anything from disconnection to a ceiling on impact to burnout as a person. And it's not the theory that's important. Again, potentially not going to be too popular in saying that. In my experience, it's the right theory that's important, combined with the ability to trust intuition and be confident with spiritual wisdom, because that's what makes the theory a framework as opposed to a dogmatic and restrictive blueprint. That's where all of our work individually is unique, it's exclusive to you, creating an impact only you can create in the world. It's what attracts your people to you as a client, authenticity and integrity, taking up space in a way that's different from the next person. Learning in our culture, just if we just think about it for a moment, is normally mental body based, isn't it? Cognitive. We absorb information with the mind. For me, that's fine when I'm being tested at school or for an exam, but it's soul-led work. It's about connection, expansion, truth, liberation. So we need not just mental body theory, but emotional and spiritual body integration of that theory to feel the benefits. Let me give you an example, like a tangible example of what I'm meaning here. I could teach you the steps to connect with your Reiki guide. And I do that. It's core theory for me as a mentor. But then what? Because if I'm teaching you the steps and we're all working per those steps, we're all going to work with a Reiki guide in the same way. Now, what's liberating or truthful or exclusive about that? Nothing. So on top of this, to connect in your own way with that Reiki guide, we use the safe guiding principles, but then we uncover and foster our own bond, our own relationship with our own Reiki guide, which is going to be different for everybody. You can do this similarly with Reiki energy itself. I mentioned it before, how the manifestation of Reiki energy for me, working with the spirit of Reiki energy, is entirely different to the next person or to those that I work with. And then we don't just want to stop there, because now we have our exclusive connection with our Reiki guide safely. We're working with our Reiki guide safely and effectively. But how are we going to embody that? How are we working with this Reiki guide for tangible benefits in everyday life? So then there's tools and skills to be able to embody that in everyday life. So learning for me, it can't just end with theory. Theory is one part, yeah, but it's a needed part. But equally as important as the others, the emotional and spiritual integration. Before I share the free activity that's waiting for you, that's going to allow you to integrate this episode into your life and practice, if you feel called, let me share an excerpt with you that was really pivotal in helping shift me from a blueprint path to just one of real expansion, real truth. And these are words that really struck me personally, really evoked a deep stir and a courage to embrace a call to change. On the inside and in my practice as well. The mainstream manufactures people as monoculture. It turns us out like cloned rows of apple trees on pesticide manicured fields. The mainstream, it trains people by pruning. It forces growth in standardised ways. The song that we sing from within the mainstream is thereby not our own song. It does not issue from the opened gates of the soul. And so our personal branches and cultural roots atrophy away. We yearn for connection with one another and with the soul. But we forget that, like the earthworm, we too are an organism of the soil. We too need grounding. The great disease of our time is meaninglessness. If fresh well springs of hope are to be found, we must first cut through the collective hallucination that there is no alternative to nihilism. We must dig where we stand. We must get beneath the grassroots of popular culture and down to the eternal taproot. Here, new life can grow from ancient stock. And that's Soil and Soul by Alistair McIntosh. When we step away from prescribed methods and into connecting in alignment with our own spiritual authority, the theoretical gaps in our training become irrelevant. So if you feel called, you can join me for a practical activity that it's going to support you to step into a deeper trust with your intuition. Now, remember, I don't do quick fixes or fluff, so you can be sure that this activity is designed to bring you closer to your truth, your unique practice, your style of energy work, not the echo of mine or anybody else's, to actually feel it, to actually embody it. So this activity is crafted to support you to rebuild trust, moving aside fear with a felt sense of safety in your body. That, as I mentioned before, is essential for intuitive clarity. When we honour what we feel internally, rewiring patterns of disassociation or override, over time our body starts to trust and listen. And our intuitive messages become clearer, stronger, and more reliable. So if this episode is unearthing a truth for you and you feel pulled to meet that shift in your practice for yourself, that practical activity is Over Inside Embodied Echoes. It's delivered in a relaxed workshop style video format, and it really does give you the space to tune into what really matters for you in your life and practice right now. Embodied Echoes is inside our free online non-guru community. I've put the link in the podcast notes for you. So whether I see you there or right here next episode, I really, really do look forward to connecting with you then. Dogma and spiritual hierarchy isn't the one, but you already know that, because sitting inside mainstream Reiki communities is often like choking inside a gilded cage, truth traded for toxic conformity, experience wielded like a weapon to silence others, individuality stifled for compliance. So I invite you to my free online non-guru community with no hierarchy or all-knowing behaviour. Here we don't follow, we liberate. We don't obey, we expand. We don't go with the crowd, we cultivate our own path together. Which means this isn't a place where your voice is silenced if it sounds different, or where your questions are met with judgment, because genuine heart-led connection and collaboration is rooted in truth, in trust, and integrity, where authenticity thrives, respect is embodied, and every unique voice is honoured as equal. The link's in the podcast notes for you.